Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We're so happy that you chose to spend these few minutes with us, and we trust that the information that we have to share with you will help you in your day-to-day life. We are going to be addressing a subject that unfortunately is a product of our times. We're going to be talking about suicide. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Neighbor-Stevens and Dr. Hines and Dr. Walks, who are our co-moderators. And I thank our distinguished guest, Dr. Donna H. Barnes, for joining us today for what is going to be a quite significant contribution to our abilities to bring information that's vetted to our communities. But I want to start with just a little curve in the road. I'd like for a moment to give credit to the co-moderators that have been with me for the past 3+ years. And I'd like them to just give a brief introduction of who they are and what they do, starting with you, Dr. Neighbor-Stevens.
I feel like everybody should know me by now. I am a pediatrician by specialty, but I have been involved in administrative medicine since 2000. And I made the transition based on concern for what was happening to my patients and their families. And I have spent most of my administrative career in the Medicaid space, which is a very important space for pediatricians. And I continue to work hard trying to make the system work for us. Prior to that, I have had an opportunity to be an assistant professor at Meharry and director of pediatric education there. I spent a couple of years as assistant medical director for the State of Tennessee Bureau of Medicaid. And I must say that my different experiences have all blended together like a nice salad and made it possible for me to do the opportunities that have come my way most recently. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr.
Is Dr. Walks on yet? Dr. Hines, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I was a later addition to the co-moderator crew, but I'm super excited that I've gotten the opportunity to join the Black Health Trust. I am a family physician by training, spent a number of years similar to Dr. Neighbor-Stevens in the Medicaid space, lots of work at federally qualified health centers. I think my passion is for kind of groups and communities that have been kind of underserved, sometimes forgotten. So whether I used to work on Indian not Native American reservations or with veterans, that's where I spent a lot of my clinical practice years doing everything from emergency medicine, occupational medicine, primary care, all of those things. I too have transitioned primarily to doing administrative work, and currently I'm the chief medical officer for a home health company. And I made that transition partly because I have 2 small kids, so they are 10 and 8, and I didn't feel like I was able to give the time that it takes to be a primary care doctor, because it is definitely more than a 40-hour-a-week commitment. So I needed to give some of that time to my family. So we'll see where life takes me. I've recently started doing clinical practice again. And then also similar to Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, some of the other things that I've done, I'm very active in the American Academy of Family Practice, was the president of my state chapter, and various other roles that I've played that, again, have allowed me to take that experience and put it into other arenas and policy arenas and business arenas, and use that knowledge and experience to try to impact and help the lives of people beyond just what I can see one-on-one in my practice settings, but at a different level. And I have learned so much from being able to take part, and I really appreciate being in this space with you all.
Thank you much, Dr. Hines. Dr. Walks isn't on yet.
Yes, he is.
Dr. Walks, would you kindly introduce yourself?
I would be very happy to introduce myself. I am just about ready, and here I am. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am sorry to be a couple of minutes late. I'm Ivan Walks. I'm a psychiatrist by training. Dr. Maxey's personal psychiatrist, though he refuses to reach out to me. I've done a lot of things in my career, and most importantly, I like to talk with people and try to help people make sense of the world when that is a challenge for a lot of us. I'm a big believer in therapy and in the power of therapy to work with medications when medications are needed to help folks do the things that make life a good place. I'm a person of faith, and I think that's a very important part of everything that I do. So I have no idea what I was supposed to say, Dr. Maxey, but that's what you got.
Well, you said, and Dr. Walks has been physicians across the country and across the world. He's been military. He's been an advisor to presidents of the United States, not Trump, but the DC presidents. And we welcome him and all the knowledge and skill that he brings to things. I want to start off before we ask Dr. Neighbor-Stevens to introduce our speaker with one thing, and bear with me, but last week we had the unexpected death of one of our regular contributors to the Black Health Trust. This week, one of our advisory members had a call late last night and early this morning asking advice, and he had to have emergency surgery. He's the former chairman of our advisory committee, and I'm happy to report that he's doing well. But I want to do a very short prayer for all of our welfare, because I do trust in the judgment of the Lord our God. Praise the Lord, bless the Lord at all times. We elevate your name, and we ask you to make our faith better, to encourage us in our lives of service, to help our message get out to people in our communities and others, to make them do the things that you would have them do to protect their health. Make us sincere and vetted in what we say to people, advice. We ask all these things in the mighty name of Christ. And bless those of us who are currently ill and recovering. Amen.
Amen.
Dr. Neighbor-Stevens, would you do the honors of introducing our distinguished speaker today, who was introduced to me by the famed Dr. William Lawson?
Certainly, it's my pleasure to introduce to our audience today Dr. Donna Holland Barnes, who is currently founder and CEO of DHB Wellness and Associates, where she conducts life coaching, grief recovery, and suicide prevention training on suicide risk management. She is a certified master trainer for suicide prevention and intervention, and has trained faculty, staff, and students, as well as community members, on how to recognize the signs of someone who is in a suicidal crisis. She's also founder of the National Organization for People of Color Against Suicide, and she has taught suicide risk management for the College of Medicine Department of Psychiatry at Howard University. She has published many articles and chapters and books and made presentations around the country. She is, she is the author of Truth About Suicide and has worked extensively where we really need a lot of help in our schools. Without further ado, I would turn it over to Dr. Barnes.
We
Who
need to
is-
get Dr. Barnes unmuted.
I had to mute myself because I blurted out a chuckle when Dr. Walls was talking. So I said, let me mute myself. But thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Mr. Maxey, Dr. Maxey, for inviting me, and for Dr. Lawson for suggesting that he invited me. Okay, so suicide is a very complicated and most understood topic. There are various opinions on it, and I'm going to hope that after this meeting, you have just a better understanding and a different way of looking at it than you have looked at it in the past. I'm going to see if, oh, I can share my screen. Okay, good. Let's see. I should have had this set up while everyone was talking. Okay, let me just start out with a few slides. Okay, so this is me. And all right, so today I'm going to, this afternoon with you, I want to talk about a particular area of suicide. And it's in reference to how we talk to our children. And the title is your child typical or troubled? Because many times we have difficulty trying to discern that, especially when they're teenagers. The crisis of Black youth suicide in America. The suicide death rate among Black youth has been found to be increasing faster than any other racial ethnic group. And this has happened within the past 10 years. And we definitely need to do something about that. So it's going to start. Did I stop sharing? I hope I stopped sharing.
You did.
Okay, good. It's going to, we're going to start with youth, simply because that's where it begins. That's my.
Take great comfort, Dr. Barnes, that technology is the enemy of us all.
You know what I mean? I'm not even apologizing. Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon is tips for talking to our young people. Because whenever I talk with young people, it's always that nobody understands me. My parents don't understand. And generally, kids will talk to whoever will listen to them. Most kids feel alone by themselves. Whenever you're thinking of suicide, you do feel alone by yourself. You have no one to talk to, and you think death is an option. If you just had a helping hand, one helping hand, that could be a lifeline to keep you alive. When you feel you have nobody and you feel no one understands you and you have no one to talk to, that's when it becomes very dangerous. And we'll talk more about that danger part after I finish talking about the tips. Okay, so most importantly, if you see someone in trouble, if you feel someone is in trouble, try to take some time aside and talk with them. If they're in your family, if they are your children, your grandchildren, your niece and your nephew, the most important thing you want to do is let them know that you care. You want to acknowledge and reinforce that you are glad that they are here speaking with you. Ask them what they feel they want or need from you in a conversation, especially if they come to you. If they come to you, ask them, what would they like out of this conversation? This lets them know that their needs are important to you. Remember that you are talking with them versus to them. Of course, we all know that. There's totally a different tone when you're talking with them, and they get that. You know, sometimes we think that kids don't understand, but they do. They have a lot of innate feelings, and they can pick up on things. They can pick up on your facial expressions. Sometimes we'll say to ourselves, where did they get that information? Or how did they learn that? Well, they pick up on things. You know, many times we'll tell our kids that we're doing fine, but they know from your face, your expression, that you're not. And when you say you're fine and you're not, you're telling that child that keep your feelings to yourself when you're feeling bad. Okay. Sometimes they have a tendency to go off on a tangent. Don't judge them. You please do not judge them. They've had enough of that already and may be very judgmental or critical of themselves already. It's very hard not to judge, but we have to learn that kids are in a different day now. It's not like it was when we were growing up. They're in a whole different day. They speak differently. They act differently. They see the world differently. You want to express an interest in what they're saying without being pushy or intrusive. And please don't talk down to them. Talk to them like they're an adult. Don't talk down to them or lecture. Let them complete this sentence or finish sharing their point of view before you respond. I mean, if you have to put tape over your mouth, do that. But you want to listen. You do not want to speak. I don't care what they're saying. If you're a parent and some of the things that they're saying is very hurtful to you, that's okay. It's not about you. It's about them, because they have a tendency to have a different perspective on things than we do. Doesn't mean that it's false. It's just their perspective. So we have to listen to that and help and try to get help to understand their perspective. Remember what it was like when you were a child. Be genuine and be honest. If you're putting on an act, they'll know it. They can pick up on it. Try to avoid a simple yes or no response to questions. If they ask you, is this confidential? Let them know that your main priority is to keep them safe and alive. And sometimes keeping them safe and alive might mean that you have to break that confidentiality. So you don't want to say yes or no. Just let them know that you want them to be safe and alive. If they continue to pursue this question, reinforce that if you can work together for the sake of that goal, then the conversation remains confidential. Do not take a commitment to total unconditional confidentiality. Of course, that's unless you're a clinician. You may not be able to keep it, and the credibility of the crisis line will be diminished in the future, both for you and the child. Try not to come across as an expert. They've had enough people telling them what to do. Now is the time to listen and work with them to come to healthier decisions. Because I find that you can really learn from kids. I like learning from them. They teach me something almost every day when you're talking with them. So be willing to learn about their interests, their music, their activities, even if you cringe as they're talking. Just try to understand what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're believing, how they're feeling. You know, one of the things people say it's really hard to tell when someone's thinking of suicide. One of the telltale signs is if they're negative, constantly negative. So sometimes I just start with, what do you think about your community? If they have nothing but negative things to say, what do you think about the institutions within your community, church, school? Again, if they have negative things to say. And then you say, well, how do you think about the world? If that's negative, this young person in front of you is very, very negative and having problems with thinking positive about anything. You know that they're in trouble. You need to spend more time with them so you can help understand why they're feeling negative. You don't want to try to say, don't feel negative, or don't do this, or don't do that, because you're not listening. As soon as you start doing that, you're not listening. You want to find out what it is that makes them feel that way. You want to keep whatever message you're trying to give them simple, positive, and solution focused. Ask for their input about what you see, what they see, hear, or are feeling. Be willing to listen. I can't help but emphasize that. Consistently and repeatedly convey a message of hope. If you can be humorous, do that. Humor can be a useful tool in maintaining rapport, but use it wisely, of course. If you're not humorous, don't even try, because then they'll laugh at you for trying to be funny. Use paraphrasing to let them know that you are hearing what they have to say and that you are empathizing with them. Because sometimes they'll say things that's bothering them and you won't get it. Don't let it go. Move on to the next subject. Go back to what they're saying that you don't get and ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And help me understand this. You know, they might come to you, well, you know, Toby said this to me, and then Toby told his friend this, that. And by the time they finish talking, you're totally confused because they mentioned 3 or 4 different names. Go back to that and ask them, help me understand. What did Toby say that made you feel this way? And also, and I know you all know this, I'm just telling you things to remind you what's on their mind. If it's on their mind, keeping them up at night and causing them not to get any rest, and causing them not to be able to study, it's serious to them. Maybe not serious to you, and you may think, oh, that's so trifling. Look at kids that are going through this and going through that, and you know, they're fine and they got this little thing that's bothering them. Please don't compare. If it bothers them, it bothers them. And take it seriously. They come to you and say they're upset because they lost a shoe. Listen to them and try to understand what that shoe meant. I'm being facetious now, but that's what I'm just trying to drive the point home, that whatever they come to you about, if it bothers them, then it's serious. Please don't make light of it. And please, please, please do not compare with other kids. Don't convey the need to move on in the conversation. As long as they're talking with you, they are safe. Focus on their feelings versus your own. Because as parents, especially if they say things that hurt us, then it becomes about us, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. We need to let our own feelings go and understand, again, that it's their perspective. That's how they saw it. It's not how you saw it, but that's how you saw it. And listen, just listen. If they ask you a tough question, be willing to say, I don't know, and that you are willing to work with them to try to figure out the answer. Don't try to be an expert, just be honest with them. And again, listen to their point of view, even if it's difficult to hear. Acknowledge their opinions and feelings while also working with them to commit to safety in life. Resist getting into an argument about who is right, because if the both of you have different opinions, it's not a matter of who's right or wrong. I don't care if they're talking about something that happened when you all were in a park last week. Neither of you are wrong. Both of you are right because you both see it differently. You see it differently. And understand that. And don't get caught up with the fact that they're looking at this whole thing wrong. That's how they saw it. That's how we saw it. Emphasize the fact that resources are available if they need extra help, if they need help outside the home, that they don't have to go through this alone. Whatever they're going through, let them know they don't have to be alone. Help them to identify options of support in their lives. And as much as possible, please try to remain impartial. Remind them of their own personal worth. Let them know they are worth something and remind them of their worth. And let them know that you sincerely believe that they can make it through this. Okay, I am going to go back to sharing. While you simmer for a minute. Okay. So, why are we so poor at preventing suicide? As you all know, the suicide rate has been increasing for the past 30 years, just constantly increasing. The government is spending billions of dollars on suicide prevention, research, many things. So if we're doing a lot towards suicide prevention, if there are a lot of companies out there and organizations out there working on suicide prevention, why is it still increasing? And my humble opinion is that we focus on the wrong thing. Depression is always the focus, and suicide is not synonymous with depression. Sometimes, if you are a clinician and you have a suicidal patient in front of you, we need to take our focus off depression for a few minutes, at least 2 weeks. Talk about how death became an option. What were the drivers? What are the triggers? And if they are a client of yours, you need to up the ante on when you see them. And the reason why I'm saying that you focus on the fact that they're looking at suicide rather than focus on the mental illness, because just because you're mentally ill or you have a mental illness doesn't mean that you're going to be more susceptible to suicide. And some of you might disagree, and that's fine. The reason I say 2 weeks is because generally, and I do mean generally, when you are in a crisis, it lasts only 2 weeks. And then continue working with this person after the 2 weeks, focusing on their thoughts of death being an option. Then you can go back into regular treatment. And if you feel that you need to change the medication, blah, 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 blah. But do spend most of your time, the first 2 weeks, talking about suicide as an option. What drove them to that? Have they ever thought of suicide before? What were the circumstances surrounding that? And as you can tell, you're in front of me now. So whatever it was that caused you to attempt 2 years ago is no longer an issue. What are some of the things that are keeping you alive? Why didn't you kill yourself last night? Why are you here in front of me? What were those things that make you want to hold on? Because first of all, please understand, people, when they are in front of you talking about it, or it's a family member and they're telling you about it, it's only because they want you to save them. If they want to kill themselves and really kill themselves, then I'm not going to tell anybody about that. If you ever have lost a patient or lose a patient, I don't ever want you to feel guilty that you did something wrong, that you didn't pull out the right stops. Many times we do that and we still lose them. It's because they really wanted to die. They didn't want you to know. They didn't tell you about it because they didn't want you to save them. They didn't want you to hurt. They didn't want to hurt your feelings. They didn't want you to feel guilty. A lot of things go on their mind to protect you from what they're getting ready to do. When someone is thinking of suicide, there are 4 things that have to line up like lucky sevens. And that's having a means, a method. They must feel vulnerable. They must not fear death, fearlessness, and then they have impulsivity. When fearlessness, impulsivity, vulnerability, and means line up like lucky sevens, then generally there's nothing that you can do. Sometimes that happens when they're away from home, 2 o'clock in the morning. It happens and we never know when that's going to happen. The only thing we can do is try to be in front of it. Try to figure out, is this person thinking about suicide? Look at their changes. Look at the words that they say. Let them know that you're always there and available to talk with them. I'm going to put up my information one more time to talk about support groups. Currently, I run support groups for families who have lost someone to suicide. People are always thinking about the person who might be suicidal, but little attention is given to the families that are left behind. When families are left behind, they go through a lot of emotional complexity, shame, blame, guilt, all of this for 2 or 3 years. They need help in getting through that, to let them know that they're not the only ones that go through this. My groups are running 8-week sessions, and they generally run from 6:30 to 8. So it's 90 minutes for 8 weeks. And we have different topics that we discuss. If you know of anyone who has lost someone to suicide and would like to join a group, please give them my information. Right now, we just finished our last session, which was in August, and I haven't started the next 8 weeks. I have to at least have 15 to 10 people, and right now I have 2. But once I get the right number of people in the group, then we get started. I like to keep the group small, no more than 10. I like it to be intimate, and trust me, by the end of those 8 weeks, we're like family. Okay. That's it.
Well, first of all, I'd like to really thank you for this information. It's been stellar. And as a parent, I'd like to know how I would, as a layperson, when it comes to suicide and mental health, how would I escalate this confidentiality to non-confidentiality if it's going to save my child?
Again, when you're talking with them, and if they are concerned about that, and if you mean your child, your personal biological child, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, no, but not as a physician, but if I have
okay.
a number of a child.
Right, if it comes up and if they ask you that, just let them know that their safety and them staying alive is more important to you, but you can't promise that confidentiality. There may be times when you have to step outside of that to get them some help, but be honest with them. And the more honest you are with them, the more they will tell you, but let them know they will always be safe, and you will never give information out if it's going to be harmful to them. But it will always be to help them, but not to just talk. Because sometimes they might not want you to tell your wife. They might not want their mother to know, or they'll tell the mother and might not want the father to know. So would then be very careful about how you promise that confidentiality.
Okay.
Because it's more important for them to be alive than to save their confidentiality.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor to my co-moderators to jump in with some questions. If there's anything in the chat, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, Dr. Walks, Dr. Hines.
So Dr. Maxey, I'd like to break protocol and see if we can unmute Dr. Lawson as a co-moderator today, because he has tremendous expertise in this area, and he was smart enough to introduce us to Dr. Barnes. So I think that they may be able to help us as we go through the conversation, if that's okay.
That's okay. And Dr. Lawson, I'm going to invite you to be Dr. Walks' co-psychiatrist to me as well.
Okay, glad to. And I just want to again thank Dr. Barnes. And actually, when I became acquainted with their organization, many of us began to struggle with the fact when I was in medical school, I was told that Black people didn't kill themselves. And it wasn't until Dr. Poussant and his colleagues came out with Lay My Burden Down to note not only we kill ourselves, but we've been doing it. Anyone been to Goree Island, where the slave ships dock, know that many of our ancestors, rather than go into slavery, killed themselves. And also, we often didn't talk about it. I was amazed when I grew up in a rural community, told that suicide was rare, non-existent, but I knew many of the people intimately and knew that there were some relatives and others who had done themselves in. But then, either because it became less of stigmatizing or because we began to look at it more closely, recently we started seeing the rates going up. And many of us talked about this concordance of events that's happened, particularly post-COVID, in which we're seeing suicide become one of the 5 top reasons why especially Black men kill themselves, combined with the high overdose rates. And Dr. Barnes and I talked about how do you separate out how many people who are doing themselves in of opiate overdoses, how many of them are suicidal and how many of them are just the circumstance from their use. Plus the high homicide rate that we're seeing in our community. And there have been others who've noted that the characteristics of the demographics in homicide is remarkably similar to that to the characteristics of suicide. And the question then becomes, we're looking at common variables that are contributing to these rates, and of course, a high accident rate, especially auto accidents for people of color. So we got this concordance, we got this surprising increase, which caught everyone by surprise. And we unfortunately, once someone's done themselves in, there's not much you can do about it. How do you prevent it? Obviously, and as Dr. Barnes noted, it's not just the mood changes, whether or not they're depressed or not, but we now know we've now added the whole circumstances. Some folks said it's the background of racism, the system of hopelessness in terms of combating that and so on. What are some of these other factors that's going on that's causing especially our young people to look at death as an alternative? Good news.
So Dr. Lawson, let me just jump in for 1 minute, because I had something happen to me today, and maybe I'm the only one that would be surprised by this. but I'm going to take advantage of Dr. Barnes being here to first of all, Dr. Lawson, you are absolutely right. Things are going exactly opposite from where I was told they would go. I remember hearing when I was in medical school, oh, Black kids don't kill themselves, they kill each other. That was one of those things that I heard. I was talking with a young person today, great family, supportive parents, educated parents, and we're talking, after church, we're talking about the power of God and what God can do. God can do anything. And I was surprised to hear this. Well, I know one thing that God can't do. And I said, because I'm ready with I just left church. I'm ready to handle this. I'm like, what is it that God can't do? And I'm struck with Dr. Barnes' focus on us listening. And thank you, Dr. Barnes. I think I did a good listening job today. I said, what is it that God can't do? Well, God can't help me when I feel really sad. And I was surprised. I was really surprised. And I think that some of the times when we are most surprised and we are anxious to jump in, no, I just told you God can do everything. But it gave me an opportunity to listen. And I said, tell me about how God can help you when you're sad. And so I began to get information and then was able to kind of say what I thought about it. But I'm still now trying to process how this young person with this amount of resources and this amount of love around them can pick that particular. I thought it would be, well, God can't fly into outer space. That's what I was ready for. I wasn't ready for God can't help me when I'm by myself in my room and I'm sad. So I just wanted to get your reaction to that, Dr. Barnes.
You handled it remarkably. I mean, there was not much more that you could do. You asked him about that, and you can say things like, well, what is it that makes you sad? Take me to one of those moments. When was the last time you felt that way? And how do you think God could intervene? Knowing what you know about God, how could he intervene and help you out? Because there are ways that he can help you out. And I want to know what you think about that. And let him kind of figure it out. The last thing you don't want to do is to tell him, if you pray more, come to church more, you're going to be fine. Because we all know that that does not work. So just get into a conversation of what God means to him. What are those moments of sadness like? In his opinion, how do you think God could intervene and that kind of thing, and go from there? But that was good to do.
No, thank you. And I just want to add that I think that all of us have to practice our receptive face and not use the what the and not use that face, because sometimes that's what we'll get. Here's an issue, and I don't want to be the main one talking. Every time I watch one of these TV shows where the kids are supposed to be so cute and precocious, and I want to just snatch them up, because I used to get snatched up. They talk back to their parents. They curse at their parents. I'm in the grocery store and I'm like, oh, I can hear from the next aisle. I know that's not a Black family, because that would not be, somebody would be hearing a slap, right? So there are all our society, I think, is making it challenging for parents and grandparents and other responsible adults, because the children are getting these bad, the only word is bad, these bad images of what normal is, these bad images of what young people do and how they interact. And I think some of the disregard for people's feelings and the disregard for how we treat each other may be involved. And I wanted to know if you can respond to that.
Well, I think that the media has a lot to do with it, social media, and these kids stay on it all day long. And the media turns the wrong people into heroes.
Mm.
because there's more clicks on their Instagram. The more clicks you get, the more money you can make, or the more popular you can become. So the more ratchet you are, the more clicks you will get. I mean, I think everybody knows Krishan. If you don't know Krishan, you must have heard something about it. She's very popular in the social media for being ratchet. She's always wasted, fighting and doing this and doing that, but she's revered by these young kids. Carly B is revered by these young kids in the way she dresses and the songs. And I mean, again, we have these kids focusing on the wrong people for heroes, and it's unfortunate. Our values and principles have changed completely. And I guess we just have to accept it, because I'm sure our parents thought we were crazy.
That's Neighbor Stephen.
I'm going to defer my question and share a question that came in from Dr. Moore Johnson from Facebook. She wants to know, why is it more likely for Black males to commit suicide?
May I add something to that question too? Is there any difference in a person choosing a painful type of suicide versus something that's non-painful, non-traumatic? Like,
okay, I will attempt to address both of those questions. Usually when you're suicidal, you have your favorite, if for lack of a better word, method. Some people do not want to use guns. Some people would prefer using poison medications, what have you. So there's no difference in reference to the person, other than the fact that they just have a preference on what they would rather use. There was a well-known poet back in the day who used to carry a bottle of barbiturates with her, because that was her choice. And she used to carry them in her purse so that whenever those 4 things lined up, like I mentioned, she would be prepared. But men have a tendency to have higher rates than women, and the same thing with boys, because they have a different makeup. They want to make sure the job is done. It's more masculine. It's the male thing to do. You don't want to attempt suicide, in a girly way by taking pills. You want to do it right, get it done. So studies have indicated that it's a masculine thing to complete suicide. Females have the highest rate of attempts. We'll attempt all day long, but we don't get to that level of hopelessness the way men do. I hope that answers your question.
I might not be good at suicide. I'm afraid of heights, hate pain. I don't know what to do. And Dr. Hines.
Yes, I really appreciate you bringing out that distinction around suicide doesn't necessarily equal depression, because especially post-COVID.
Oh, okay.
You went back on mute, Dr. Hines.
The impulsive acts of suicide, and then how can if they're your loved one, right, your kid or whatever, how do you look for that, right? Because you've been trained to think like, oh, if my person's not depressed, they're okay, right? But then you've got these stories of people kids failed the test and went in their room, and or things that the parents didn't even know about, and next thing you know, they've committed suicide. How do you deal with it?
Well, supposedly they say, this is what they say, I don't know how true this is, that when a person is suicidal, they tell on themselves, either through behavior, either through words that they use, or just actions. We had a Howard medical student who took her own life. I think when I first joined Dr. Lawson, I think it was in 2003 or 2004. And she was a medical student who always studied with the other students, was always sitting in the front of the class. Then all of a sudden, she cut all her hair off, which doesn't really mean anything, but that was one thing that the students noticed. The other thing was that she started sitting in the back of the class, and then she started not always showing up. And ultimately, she went to a hotel room in the next town over and took her own life. And the students were reeling with guilt. All her friends, the ones that used to study with her, felt so guilty. And one student even said, you know, she gave me her book bag a couple of days before she died, and I didn't even think anything of it. And it was, she was giving away things that, you know, she would normally use, but he didn't think anything of it and said, oh, thank you. And so many of the students had thought, you know, about things and things that she was doing and didn't bother to say anything. One girl who studied with her said, I wanted to ask her, but I didn't want to hurt her feelings, or I didn't want her to get upset with me for asking. Believe it or not, asking the question, you'll be surprised, means a lot to them, especially if you're serious. And you can say things like, you know, I know when people are going through what you're going through, and I noticed the other day you kept using these words, or you kept saying this, and I noticed that you used to like to do this, but you don't do it anymore. Tell me, sometimes when people do the things that you've been doing, they think of taking their own life. I'm just wondering if that's what you're thinking about, because they do kind of tell on themselves. Now, I'm saying that, but I'm also going to say this. There are times when you are blindsided, completely blindsided. There was a woman who was cooking dinner in her kitchen, talking to her neighbor. Her son walked through the kitchen and said, hi, Mrs. So-and-so, hi, Mom. I'm going upstairs. And she says, okay. Didn't think anything, because the kid was supposedly a well-adjusted happy kid. And she called him down to dinner. He didn't come down. She had his brother go upstairs to see where he is, if he's sleeping, to wake him up. And he was hanging. He was hanging from one of his lamp lights. Totally unsuspected. Those things will happen because kids have a way of masking their feelings. I had a colleague who always thought about suicide since the age of 13. And later, as he became an adult, he started talking and sharing with his mother some of those feelings that he had as a kid. And she says, why didn't you ever tell me this? I never saw it. I never knew. And he said, because I didn't want you to. I didn't want you to know what I was going through. So it's you know, 6 in one hand and a half a dozen in the other. It's not easy. The only thing we can do is just try to be aware. But thank you for the question.
Let me ask you another question, but I want to precede it. Is suicide in our community limited to the continental United States? And is Dr. Kervin on? Is there a problem in the Caribbean? Suicide among youth, especially.
Dr. Lawson, would you like to?
I see Dr. Lisa is on, but she's muted. And she may have stepped out for an emergency because she's always working. We know that about her.
Yeah, she might be at the beach.
But it is not, let me just say what I know, what I experienced. It is not just America, it is also around the world. Now, African countries and Caribbean countries have very, very low rates of suicide, only because it's not recognized, it's not certified as a suicide. It might be certified as something else. Like Dr. Lawson was saying, you know, there are accidents that are probably suicides, there are homicides that are probably suicides, and there are overdoses that are probably suicide. All 3 of those things are diagnosed differently, and they're not a suicide unless the coroner is 99% positive that it's a suicide. So we have a lot of suicides that are suicides that are not counted as suicides. But the Caribbean never recognizes it. I've had, when I was at Howard, I had work study students who were from all over the world. And when they found out the work that I was doing, they would go, ooh, we don't do that in our country. Ooh, you know, they just thought it was horrible that we were even talking about suicide. You know, and I mean, they're a lot stricter that allow kids to be honest about their feelings. If they're crying, they'll say, you know, if you're going to cry over that, what do you think a storm is going to do? And, you know, they were very strict, but it's no different.
There's one other thing we discussed about people who commit suicide by not doing the things that they know they should do. I talked to a young man the other day in the office who had just given up on taking any more vaccines or any more treatment. And he basically wanted to die. Could you comment on that type of situation?
Yes, because I think there are more ways than one to take your own life, especially among our culture. We'll do it. They call it parasuicides. We are constantly engaging in a dangerous lifestyle, like not taking the vaccine or like not doing what they need to do to stay healthy because we're trying to kill ourselves. So that is a phenomenon.
Okay, I understand Dr. Sherrod has her hand up. Can we
She,
recognize
in the
that?
chat, she said, can you address suicide and mass shooters?
I can tell you my opinion of mass shooters. I think that mass shooters are suicides. That's what they are. They don't get up in the morning and say, I think I'll go and kill people. They know that if they get up and go kill people, that they're going to get killed also. It's just another way of killing themselves. And they have decided to take other people out with them because that's how angry they are. But mass shooters are suicides first.
Thank you. That was one of my concerns. Thank you, and it was a very good presentation.
Thank you for the
Can I
question.
just add to that too, that the phrase death by cop, right, is an act, is a thing, right? So even if it's not in a mass shooting scenario, people who are using, to your point, their actions to be shot by someone else, cop included, it's a thing.
Absolutely, it's another method. It's a method of suicide. I remember I wrote one of the first articles and it was called Suicide by Cop. This was like in the late 1900s. It was like 1998 or something, or 99, when it first became a phenomenon. And they in the police force all around the country noticed it was a phenomenon because one kid had got into a cop's way, was threatening the cop, had a gun that didn't have any bullets in it, doing like this. He got shot. And when they went to his car, they opened up his car, there was a note in it to the police officer apologizing that he did what he did, but he knew that he was going to shoot him and he apologized to the cop. And that's when it came to them that, wow, this is a phenomenon.
And I might add that there's a colleague of ours, Nathan Hare, who came up with the whole idea of quiet suicide. That is a lot of folks suicide. It's a way the kind of attention have in death that they wouldn't have gotten in life. And so the idea of going out is somewhat not martyrship, but something like a martyrship to shoot hours, mass shootings, and so forth, and then know they're going down in a blaze of bullets, a blaze of glory.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Maxey, I'm feeling very strongly that this was a great introduction, but there is still a lot left to be explored. And I would certainly like to ask Dr. Barnes if she will entertain an invitation to return, because we've identified the issue as an issue. It's an it, but what do we do about it? Especially in a country where there's so limited access to mental health services. So I would certainly like for us to revisit.
Can address the recording being stopped? Is the recording back on?
We're still streaming live. We can go ahead.
Okay.
That was a very good comment that you made, Dr. Stevens, because I only had 20 to 30 minutes. And suicide, well, I haven't even touched the surface. Suicide is just such a broad topic, and there's so many entities to it, and it's very complicated. What really upsets me, people say, can you come and talk about suicide for 5 minutes? And I'll say, no, I cannot do it for 5 minutes, and I'll have to refuse. But yes, you're 100% correct, and I would be glad to come back and join this group.
And let me make a plea to bring it back to just talk about the issue of, we said very little about treatment. I think Dr. Bond made the excellent point. Now they're putting some resources in, but at the same time, right now, I think Dr. Watson just can clarify, but there's only 2 medications that are actually approved to try to treat suicide. And here's a major killer of people, but yet the approved treatments, approved medical treatments are really very, very limited.
What are those 2, Dr. Watson?
Clozapine and ketamine.
Okay, ketamine. I knew ketamine was one.
And clozapine just got approved 2 years, last year.
Okay.
And ketamine is the only new drugs that's there. And
Wow.
on the other hand, we got a long list of medications that you can kill yourself with. And so much so, it's becoming an issue, so much so that for the first time, we're now beginning to test drugs for their risk for suicide rather than just for their general efficacy. And as you know, some of the weight loss medications are now recognized are also risk factors for suicide.
I'm just wondering, I know Tom Ansel of the director of NIMH, when he was the director, now he's over at Google, but he used to say that, NIMH did do a study on ketamine, and that what it does is it makes them feel much better, and they're no longer thinking of suicide. And then I'm wondering how long that feeling lasts, and then after it wears off, do they have to keep taking it? And I mean, how do you medicate the thought of death, away? Those are just questions that I have. But I mean, if it works and it covers that 2-week period that I mentioned as a crisis, I guess that would be good.
No, we certainly want to ask you back, and so we'll talk offline and find out what your schedule will permit, but we'd love to have you back, as Dr. Neighbor-Stevens says, and go in deeper. Remember that we have a lay audience, and we want to make sure we understand as much as possible. Are there any other comments or questions in the chat we need to deal with, Dr. Stevens, Dr. Walks, Dr. Hines?
Yeah. I put one in, I don't know if you saw it, that Dr. Barnes would say a little bit about the issue of famous people committing suicide.
About famous people committing suicide? What about famous people? The people just like you and I. What about people?
Well, the idea is that famous people with wealth, glory, fame, it seems they will be not as vulnerable. And yet you and I know a number of famous people, not only that when they committed suicide, but there was almost a disbelief by the public, sometimes even calling them homicides rather than suicide. That they would think about suicide given their recognition.
Well, that's true.
And of course, that famous cruise that we always go on, this whole train cruise, is part of that foundation.
The only problem with celebrity suicides is that it gives other people who are on the fence permission to go on ahead and do it, because they figure if the celebrity can do it, like when Robin Williams took his own life, the suicide hotline got more calls than ever before when he took his own life. And then, of course, we had that dancer. What was his name? It was Ticker. I forget what his name was. But he was on the Ellen DeGeneres show. He was a Black man, and he danced very well. And he recently, about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, took his own life. And people were shocked and surprised. But again, when we see our heroes take their own life.
I think it was Twitch. Yeah.
Absolutely, that was his name. And when we see people like that we know, we think it's okay to do it. And don't let a religious leader take their own life, because that community is harmed for years because a religious leader did it.
Well, thank you very much. Thank everybody for joining us today. I'd like to have you have some final comments, Dr. Barnes, before our moderators give theirs.
Thank you very much again for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I've learned throughout the years. And I want to thank Dr. Lawson for mentoring me all these years. I met him when I was in Texas. I invited him down to speak at a conference that I was having on suicide prevention. And then he did so great. I invited him the following year. And then he said, you know, we need you in my department of psychiatry because I have residents that really need to learn more about this. And so that's how I got at Howard. I joined his team, I think it was in 2002.
Right. Yep.
Dr. Hines?
Well, again, I second Dr. Neighbor Stevens' thoughts on, we've just kind of scratched the surface on this topic, but thank you, Dr. Barnes, for starting that conversation. And I think one of the things that, kind of stands out is that, one, I definitely got some tips on how to be a little bit more conscious when I'm talking to my young people. And two, no one is exempt, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My psychiatrist, Dr. Walks.
First of all, Dr. Barnes, thank you. Dr. Lawson, thank you. This is such a big deal. This impulsivity combined with hopelessness, combined with a way out. When I talk with someone who is thinking of suicide, I don't try to tell them that it's wrong or it's bad. I tell them, I say, if you do it and you do it successfully, it's the very last thing you get to do on this earth. So let's try a few other things first. And maybe it's that 2-week period. Maybe it's some time to just look at a few other actions before, because you can't take away suicide from anybody. You can't tell them, no, you can't do it. So accepting that it is something they can do, at least in my experience, has been a way of partnering with them so that we can try a few other things and they can keep the suicide in their back pocket. To me, it allows that kind of partnership. And at the same time, I think what Dr. Barnes shared today, whether the person is 2 or 92, letting people tell you what's happening in their head is just important. Some folks are more verbal than others, but what anyone is willing to share with you, we have to be willing to listen. And then if we're not the Dr. Barnes or the Dr. Lawson and we're not sure what to do, then we take that information to someone who does know what to do. Because as Dr. Barnes said, we can never promise someone confidentiality if we think that what they tell us may end their life or cause harm to someone else. Whether you're a professional or not, you should never promise, no matter what you tell me, I'm never going to tell anybody. Always a message of I care about you and I want you to be safe and let's talk. So,
thank you, Dr. Neighbor Stevens.
Thank you again, Dr. Barnes, and to our audience of Black Health Trust. Thank you for continuing to trust us to bring you vetted, necessary information. I do want to say that we are aware that the new COVID vaccines have been approved by both the FDA and the CDC with advice as to who should get it, when they should get it, how they should get it. And we will be addressing that in the very near future on the program.
Thank you.
And unless you are young, like Dr. Maxey, you might want to start wearing your mask again.
Dr. Barnes, we certainly appreciate you giving your valuable time to us today, and we definitely want to work out a schedule where you can come back. And I'm going to ask Dr. Walk, who is chairman of our task force on vaccines, if we can reconvene that group to have an update on the new monovalent vaccine that's available for the new COVID that's out, and we need to bring that back to the table. It's not over. It's coming back. The hospitals in Los Angeles are full. So if you would kindly pull that together and decide when you want to have a Wednesday night meeting or whatever night you want, we'd like to reconvene our advisory committee on that. And again, thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to do one other thing, Dr. Walks. There's so much stuff happening. And even though we're not a religious show, I'm going to ask you to take us off the air with prayer. And thank you, Simon, for your help. Dr. Walks.
Always happy to pray, Dr. Maxey. Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to you with thanksgiving for this day, with thanksgiving for this gathering, with thanksgiving for our lives, for our families, for people that care to listen to us and that care to be concerned about us. And we thank you for knowing that we are never alone and that you are always there for us to reach out to. And I thank you for the preacher that told me years ago when he was struggling with depression that God doesn't waste anything. So if God made psychiatrists, there must be a use for you. And I've never forgotten him, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the meeting with Pope John Paul II when the Pope issued a papal edict that it's okay to go to church and go for mental health treatment. And so these opportunities that you put in front of us to focus on the mental health needs of our community while we continue to have faith in you are just huge. And so I just thank you for that. I thank you for all of us today. And we pray for safety and good health for all those we know and love, both near and far, and all those around the world. We pray and ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And thanks everybody. Great Sunday. Simon, thank you.